At least one child isn't a disappointment, Dad announced, toasting my sister. I pulled out my phone, showed them my account balance. $53 million. Happy birthday, here's my gift. The truth is, I knew the night was going to sting the second I stepped into the clubhouse. It was one of those absurdly pristine places, rich people's idea of rustic, perched on a hill with a view of the 18th hole and the kind of chandelier that could blind you if you stared at it too long. I adjusted my collar and walked into the dining hall just in time to hear the tail end of my sister Isabel's newest achievement being praised like she'd just solved cancer and negotiated world peace in the same afternoon. My baby girl, my mother gushed, raising her wine glass. Head of surgery at Westbridge General, can you believe it? Yes, Mom. We've all heard. I took my seat at the far end of the long table. One of those oversized ones with white linen and gold place cards. Mine just said Adrian. No title. No little founder of Orion Dynamics or CEO. Just my name, like I was a +1 someone had forgotten to vet. The toast had barely ended before my father, Leonard, clinked his glass and stood. 60 years, he began, puffing his chest like he was about to deliver a State of the Union address. And I'm proud of a lot of things, my wife, this family, my beautiful daughter who saves lives every day. He paused dramatically. At least one of my kids made something of himself. The room laughed. Some out of habit. Some because they didn't know any better. I just sat there with my glass of whiskey, swirling the ice, swallowing the heat in my chest. Not a single mention of me. No acknowledgement of the company I'd built from scratch. No nod to the fact that I was sitting there in a suit I bought after closing a $300 million contract with the European Space Agency. Nope. I was still the kid who played with drones. My cousin leaned over halfway through dinner. Still running your little toy company, huh? I smiled tightly. Sure am. Just launched a reusable orbital platform last month. It'll probably outlive all of us. He laughed like I was joking. Isabel, sitting across from me in a champagne-colored dress, gave me a pitying look. You should really come by the hospital sometime. Maybe you'll feel inspired to do something tangible. I wanted to scream. Instead, I reached for the breadbasket. No one at that table had any idea what Orion Dynamics actually did. They still thought it was some YouTube drone hobby that got lucky. They didn't know we had contracts with 6 international governments. That we supplied critical tech for emergency space-to-ground supply drops. That 2 Fortune 500s had tried to buy us out, and I said no twice. My dad stood up again near dessert, holding up his wine glass for a second toast. To Isabel, he said proudly. And to family. Real family. The kind that makes you proud to say your last name. Everyone clapped. I finished the last of my drink and smiled. Tight. Cold. Maybe tonight was the night I told them the truth. Not just about the money. About everything. Let them find out what the disappointment in the family had really been building in silence. That night, after the toasts and the fake smiles and the endless clinking of glasses, I went back to the guest suite they'd reserved for me. A courtesy, I guess. Or maybe a way to keep me close enough to tolerate, but far enough not to include. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my dress shoes, staring at the cream-colored walls and trying not to punch a hole through one of them. It wasn't about the toast. Not really. It was everything that led up to it. Everything they still didn't see. Back when I was 20, I told my parents I wanted to study mechanical engineering. They had plans for me, law school, maybe finance. Something respectable. I remember the look on my dad's face when I showed him my acceptance letter from Caltech. You want to tinker with gears for a living, he said, his voice thick with contempt. What a waste. I went anyway. Graduated early, landed a government job designing propulsion components. I thought maybe if I climbed the ladder, earned my stripes, they'd come around. But when I quit that job 3 years later to start my own company, they acted like I'd lost my mind. You're going to give up a pension and stability for what? A fantasy project? My mom said, folding laundry like she couldn't be bothered to look me in the eye. Do you even have a business plan? I did. I had partners. I had prototypes. I had angel investors ready to write checks. But the moment one of those investors asked for a family referral, my father stepped in. Killed it. Leonard Turner. Man of principle. Always had a quote ready from some business book he'd half-read. Adrian's not ready for leadership, he told them. Too many ideas, not enough discipline. And just like that, the funding dried up. Doors closed. Calls stopped coming in. I kept going anyway. Orion Dynamics started out of a storage unit and a half-broken 3D printer. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. Slept on the floor more times than I care to count. And somehow, brick by brick, I built it. Now, we design orbital transfer systems. Space logistics platforms. Specialized drones that can deliver medical supplies across continents in under 4 hours. And yet, they still call it playing with drones. The last straw came a few years ago. My father's company, Turner and Ward, had a chance to partner with us. We had developed a lightweight emergency drone, ideal for rural medical deliveries. A perfect fit. He laughed in my face. We're not aligning our brand with the tech gimmick. So I walked out. And I never looked back. Until tonight. When I sat at that table and listened to him toast my sister like she was the second coming, while pretending I didn't exist. They don't know what they started, but they will. The next evening, the intimate family dinner felt like round 2 of the same performance. Smaller crowd, same script. We sat in the private lounge of the resort, leather booths, dim lighting, overpriced cocktails, and Isabel was still the headliner. She was mid-story about performing some complicated procedure on a 12-year-old's spine when my mom cut in with a grin. "You should see the lake house she just bought," she said, her voice bright. "It's gorgeous. 2 stories, right on the water. Just stunning." "Still in upstate?" asked Aunt Carrie. "Finger Lakes," Isabel replied, like it was nothing. "It's really just a getaway spot. We'll probably only use it in the summer." "Oh, that sounds amazing," said my cousin. "You must host." Isabel turned to me suddenly, her tone sugary sweet. "You know, Adrian, you should come house sit for us during the off-season. It's quiet. No Wi-Fi, though. You'd probably get a break from your, what do you call it again? Drone work?" I smiled. It was that kind of smile you wear when you've just been slapped and are trying not to react. "Space logistics," I said calmly. "We just completed a delivery from low orbit to a facility in Kenya in under 6 hours." Isabel blinked. "Right," she said, waving her wine glass. "Very Black Mirror." Laughter all around. I took a sip of water. My father cleared his throat like he was about to deliver another proclamation. "I think Adrian's problem," he began, already smirking, "was always the same: too many dreams, not enough discipline. You come up with a dozen ideas and drop 9 of them. That's not how the real world works." "The real world," I repeated. "Hard work. Focus. Showing up every day, not chasing moonshot ideas like you're Tony Stark." "He does run a billion-dollar company," my cousin muttered. I wasn't sure if it was sarcasm or defense. My father chuckled. "Paper valuations. Everyone's a billionaire on paper these days." My mother leaned in across the table. "You should really consider getting into something more stable. Isabel has a retirement plan. Equity. She's secure." "I'm secure," I said. She smiled politely, like she hadn't heard me. "I just wish you'd settle down," she added. "A nice condo. Maybe a wife. Something real. Something real." I stared down at my plate, where my steak was already going cold. The silence stretched for a second too long, and that's when the extended family decided to pile on. "So, Space Boy," Uncle Henry said, raising his glass, "dear little drones bring back moon cheese yet?" That got a big laugh. Even Isabel cracked up. "Careful, Henry. He might beam you up if you keep teasing him." I pushed my chair back slowly. The legs scraped against the tile with a sharp screech that cut through the noise. I looked around the table. My sister. My parents. The family that had ignored me, dismissed me, mocked me, and now couldn't even pretend to respect me. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. "I need some air." I left my napkin on the chair and walked out. My hands clenched so tight my knuckles went white. They had no idea. But they would. I didn't plan it. Not really. I stood alone on the resort balcony, watching a golf cart putter off into the dark. My drink was still in my hand. Ice mostly melted. I could hear their laughter behind the glass, muffled, distant, like I was already gone. Then I pulled out my phone. I opened my Fidelity app. The screen blinked to life. The number stared back at me. $53,287,991.16. I took a long breath. Then I walked back inside. The room had quieted some. Dessert plates sat half-finished on the table, the candles flickering low. My father was mid-story about some deal he'd closed in '98, trying to teach Isabel's boyfriend the art of the handshake. "Actually," I said, my voice level but loud enough to carry, "I think it's time I said something." Everyone turned. My mother blinked. "Adrian, dear, are you all right?" "Never better." I walked slowly toward the center of the room, pulling out my chair. Instead of sitting, I placed my phone face up on the table, angled toward my father. He glanced down, then looked again. "What's this?" "My investment account. Personal. Not Orion's. Just mine." He stared at the screen, then picked up the phone like it was radioactive. 53? Is this a joke?" "Nope. Fully liquid. I cashed out of one of our private equity arms last quarter." Isabel leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Wait, you have $53 million? Technically 53.2, I said. "Give or take market swings." Silence fell over the table like someone had dropped the curtain. "I don't understand," my mother said finally. "How?" I turned the phone toward her. Swiped. Opened the Orion Dynamics dashboard. "That's the current valuation," I said. The number filled the screen. $5.2 billion. Someone gasped. "Aunt Carrie, maybe." Isabel looked like she was trying to do math in her head and not liking the answer. "I started Orion with 2 partners and 1 broken drone prototype," I said. "We've since signed exclusive logistics contracts with NATO, the UN, and SpaceMed International. We've turned down 3 acquisition offers. The last one was for $6 billion. You never told us, my father muttered. You never asked, I said. I pulled out a small leather folder from my blazer pocket, slid it across the table. While we're sharing, this is the property breakdown of the resort, including the clubhouse you're sitting in right now. My mother opened it. Turn to page 3, I said. She did. Her hand flew to her mouth. Orion Dynamics Subdivision 6, LLC, I explained. We acquired a 68% stake in the hospitality group that owns this place last spring. Technically, I'm your landlord tonight. Leonard stared at me, completely frozen. His fork hung in midair like he forgot what food was. You said I played with drones, I said, voice steady. That I didn't have discipline. That my company was a tech gimmick. I didn't know. No, you didn't, I cut in. You didn't want to know. Because it was easier to keep thinking of me as the failure. Isabel swallowed hard. Why wouldn't you tell us any of this? Because none of you would have believed it unless you saw a dollar sign attached. Silence again. I looked around the table at their stunned faces, so smug 15 minutes ago, now trying to rewrite every assumption they'd made about me since college. I didn't come here to brag, I said finally. I came here to celebrate Dad's birthday. But after years of being the punchline, I figured it was time to stop pretending. I sat down, picked up my glass. Cheers, I said softly. To real success. No one raised their glass. The silence after my toast was thick enough to choke on. No clinking glasses. No follow-up jokes. Just the sound of everyone at the table trying to process what the hell just happened. I took a slow sip of my drink, let the quiet stretch. Let it sink in. My mother recovered first. Oh, sweetheart, she said, her voice now warm, suddenly maternal. You should have told us. We had no idea you were doing so well. Her hand reached across the table, landing lightly on mine. The same hand that used to wave away conversations about my company like they were beneath her. I just wish you'd shared this sooner, she added, smiling like we were suddenly best friends. We could have supported you more. Aunt Carrie chimed in next, laughing nervously. I always knew you had a little genius in you, Adrian. I mean, space. It's so exciting. Isabel finally spoke, her voice careful. I didn't mean to belittle your work, she said. I thought it was more tech startup than, actual aerospace. Her smile was tight, her eyes scanning the room like she was recalibrating her place in it. Maybe there's something we could do together? Orion's medical drones. My hospital's been exploring new transport tech for organ delivery. Of course. I smiled politely. We're currently in partnership talks with a few major providers. I'll put your name in with the outreach team. Her lips pressed together. Not a no, but not a yes either. My father sat back in his chair, arms crossed, still trying to project authority. This changes things, he said slowly, like he was the one delivering the update. Now we need to think strategically. Your company's at a critical phase. This kind of valuation opens doors. We should talk, maybe over lunch. Map out your next steps. I raised an eyebrow. My next steps. He nodded, completely serious. You've got to build a plan. Now's the time to bring in experience, structure. And as a family, we can help guide that. You need someone who understands how to navigate legacy. Leonard, I said calmly, I've been doing just fine without a family advisory board. He looked startled, like no one had ever interrupted his vision before. My mom gave a light laugh. Adrian, come on. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to be part of it now. Now that they'd seen the numbers. Now that they understood this wasn't a hobby or a pipe dream. Now that they realized I wasn't the failure they'd spent the last decade laughing at behind half-full wine glasses. I sat back in my chair and let the silence build again. I appreciate the sudden interest, I said. But where was all this support when I was sleeping in a rented warehouse and eating canned beans for dinner? Where was it when you told potential investors I wasn't ready for leadership? Nobody answered. You didn't care until you saw a dollar sign, I said finally. That's not support. That's opportunism. No one disagreed. And that told me everything I needed to know. By dessert, things had shifted. The smugness had turned to scrambling. The glances toward me were no longer dismissive. They were calculating. I could feel it in the way my aunt leaned in every time I so much as adjusted my napkin, or the way Isabel kept checking her phone like she expected a breaking news alert about Orion Dynamics. That's when I decided it was time. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a slim black envelope. High-grade paper. Thick. Weighty. I slid it across the table toward my father. He didn't move to pick it up. What's this? He asked, wary. A birthday gift, I said, setting down my fork. From me to you. He eyed it like it might explode, then slowly peeled it open. My mother leaned over his shoulder, and Isabel actually stood up to get a better look. I watched as his eyes scanned the first page, then the second. He didn't make it to the third. What is this? He asked, his voice flat. A business notice, I said. As of last week, Orion Dynamics finalized the acquisition of Aeropath Charter, your longtime aviation supplier. His jaw tightened. We've been using Aeropath for over 20 years, he said, like I didn't know. You still are, I replied. Just now through us. My mother blinked. Why would you? Because Aeropath was hemorrhaging money, I said. We picked them up for a steal. Didn't even need a full board vote. They're now a subsidiary under our logistics branch. Leonard turned the page again. His face went pale. That's the new contract, I added. You'll see a revised rate sheet, updated access terms, and a clause requiring all emergency charter services to be approved by Orion's operations team. Effective immediately. You can't be serious. Dead serious, I said. Of course, you're free to find another supplier. But based on your volume and timeline requirements, that'll be difficult. Especially since Orion now controls most of the short-haul inventory in the tri-state area. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. I call it vertical integration, I said with a cold smile. You call it family, right? Just good business. No one said a word. Then Isabel sat back down and muttered, You really did all this? Behind our backs? I turned to her. You mean the way you all made decisions about me for years? The way you pulled strings to block my investors? The way you told me I'd never make it? She didn't answer. I reached into my phone again, pulled up a slide deck. I turned the screen toward her, showing a list of companies under Orion's drone transport division. At the bottom, highlighted in green, Westbridge Medical Network, in contract negotiations. Her eyes widened. Your hospital? I said calmly. We're about to become your primary transport partner for organ transfers. A 6-year deal. She said nothing, just stared at the screen like she was seeing it in a dream or a nightmare. So, I said, tucking my phone back in my pocket, congratulations are in order. Seems like both our careers are about to get a lot more interconnected. No one was laughing anymore. Not even a nervous chuckle. Just stunned silence, and the smell of cold creme brulee. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. I didn't plan a dramatic exit. But by the time coffee was poured and no one dared speak above a whisper, I knew I wasn't staying a second longer. I stood up and slid my chair back, slow and deliberate. All eyes turned to me, like I was about to deliver the eulogy at a funeral no one saw coming. My mother rose instantly, her hand fluttering toward my arm. Adrian, please, don't leave like this. We're still your family. I looked at her, calm as ever. Were you my family when you laughed at me for playing with drones? When you told my sister I should house sit because I didn't have a real home? Sweetheart, she said softly, we didn't mean any of that. It was just teasing. Jokes. I shook my head. It wasn't a joke to me. Not when I was building something from nothing. Not when I was scraping by, eating ramen and fixing prototypes with duct tape. And definitely not when Dad told potential investors I wasn't leadership material. My father leaned forward, gripping the envelope like it could still be undone. We all said things we regret, he muttered. But let's not throw away the future over old wounds. I gave a short laugh. The future? That's exactly what you threw away, over and over again. You wanted me to stay small because you couldn't imagine me being more than your disappointment. Isabel stood up now, her voice tight. So what, Adrian? You're just cutting us all off? Because we didn't grovel fast enough? No, I said. Because you only see my value when it benefits you. I reached into my pocket again, pulled out my phone, and opened the logistics dashboard. I turned the screen toward her, just as I had earlier. But this time, I swiped to a live update. See this? I said. Your hospital's old organ transport vendor replaced. As of last week, Orion's drones are already running those routes. Her mouth opened slightly. Already? Without even finalizing the contract? We took over their assets. Quietly. Legally. Efficiently. I locked eyes with her. I didn't need to announce it. I just did it. My mother sank slowly back into her chair. You can't just walk out, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I gave her a look that wasn't cruel, but it wasn't forgiving either. I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove I matter to you people, but I don't need to anymore. I built something bigger than this table, this family, this room. I turned toward the exit. Behind me, chaos began to bubble up, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, the clatter of someone's fork dropping. My father said something I didn't catch. Isabel cursed under her breath, but I didn't stop. I pushed open the doors and stepped outside. The air was crisp and quiet. A sleek black Lucid waited at the curb, engine purring like it already knew I was done with all of this. As I slid into the back seat, I looked once more toward the building. They were still in there, scrambling to rewrite the story they'd written me out of. Still chasing a version of control they no longer had. I leaned back in the leather seat. Home, I told the driver. And we pulled away, smooth and silent, leaving the past in the rearview. The Orion Dynamics campus doesn't look like much from the air. That's the point. From above, it's just a cluster of steel and glass nestled deep in the Nevada desert, camouflaged against the tan expanse of nothingness. But inside, it's another world. I walked through the glass atrium with the hum of servers in my ears, passing through biometric scanners that knew me better than my own family ever did. The smell of ozone and soldering metal drifted from the prototype lab down the hall. It felt like stepping back into reality. back into what I'd built. My assistant, Callie, met me just outside the executive suite. She didn't ask how the trip went. She didn't need to. You've got back-to-back this afternoon, she said, handing me a sleek tablet. Who contract review at 2, prep meeting for the Falcon X launch at 3. And your sister is in the lobby. I stopped walking. Isabel? I asked, without looking up. She nodded. Didn't have an appointment. Says it's urgent. I took the tablet, scrolled past the incoming messages, and found one marked Oregon Transport Logistics, Westbridge. Tell her to schedule an appointment, I said, still scrolling. Like anyone else. Callie didn't flinch. Got it. She turned and walked off without another word. Inside my office, the walls were lined with schematics, orbital platforms, atmospheric entry modules, drone fleet expansions. A live feed of our hangar displayed a gleaming new vertical takeoff craft, undergoing its final test cycle. I set the tablet down and sat at the desk. The sun spilled in through the angled windows, casting long shadows across the blueprints. My phone buzzed again. More family texts. Missed calls. A voicemail from Mom. A new one from Dad. I didn't open them. Instead, I tapped Select All, then deleted the entire thread. No hesitation. No regret. I turned back to the schematics, my fingers brushing the edge of a new design. Not because it needed my attention, but because it deserved it. These machines never doubted me. They didn't flinch when I failed. They didn't laugh behind my back or dismiss my dreams as distractions. They flew. A quiet knock came at the door. Callie's voice filtered through. Boardroom's ready when you are. I stood, adjusted my cuffs, and looked around one last time. This was my world. Not the resort. Not the dinner table. Not the expectations they tried to trap me in. They told me I was the failure. But now? Now they operate in a world I created. And I don't need their approval anymore. I opened the door and stepped into the corridor, the future unfolding ahead of me like a runway ready for launch.